Hey everyone, welcome to Let's Talk About the POTS Life, your go-to podcast for all things POTS. Whether you're living with POTS or supporting someone who is, this is the place for you.
Welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk About the POTS Life.
This episode, we are going to talk a little bit more about how you can talk about POTS to others, right? I think even when I was diagnosed, it's kind of, it's a long title if you don't say POTS. And a lot of people are like, are you saying pot or pots? And then they look at you sideways. So we're hoping to maybe give you strategies on how to talk to others or, even understand it yourself a little bit more.
Yeah, because if you would even just Google search like help for POTS, you could get some interesting feedback if they think you're meaning pot, like marijuana.
So
You
many
could get
things.
lots of different feedback. So
I had somebody in here the other day and she said, I need a shirt that says I have POTS. And someone misheard her and they're like, I don't think you should wear a shirt that says I have pot. And I'm like, that's exactly why we need this episode.
Oh, it's definitely challenging to understand and explain what it is. Kelsey, when you first told me that you had POTS, I had never heard of that before. And so I had to ask some questions to you to get familiar with it and understand what you were even going through at the time.
Honestly, myself, I had to look it up. When I was having all my symptoms, a friend of mine is a nurse. And when I told her what was going on, she said, oh, that sounds like POTS. And then I'm like, well, what is that? And so before I even had my tilt table, I kind of already knew I had started to look things up. But when I was diagnosed, I'm like, okay, now I have the formal diagnosis, but what does this even mean? Even just getting the words out, postural, orthostatic, tachycardia syndrome can be a mouthful.
I still
She,
can't say it. Yeah.
yeah. When we were doing promos in the beginning, she was like, you say that part because it's hard for me to get out. When you are diagnosed and you read these words, it is hard to make sense of it. But basically, what I try to tell people is one, I say I have POTS, and then I say what that stands for. And they're like, what is that? And it depends, honestly, who I'm talking to or how much time I have in the moment. Sometimes, even though it's not, and I know that, I'll say, oh, it's that heart thing I have. And, you just move on.
Right.
Because when you look a certain way, it's kind of hard to describe to others all the ins and outs.
Well, that is, and I lump POTS into this too, is, anyone that has a chronic disease that's invisible to the outside, right? If you are living with diabetes, if you have Crohn's, any of those things, they're all happening inside of you. And you might look visually fine. And so when someone's like, oh, I have this disease or I have this condition, you're like, well, you're fine.
You look fine.
Yeah, you don't look sick.
Right. Brett and I are a perfect example. POTS aside, I have celiac, was diagnosed young. She has Crohn's. But if you look at us on camera, we look fine,
Yeah,
right?
we do
So,
our best. Yeah.
right. So it is true, society expects when you get a diagnosis that you should look a certain type of way, and POTS isn't like that. Instead of saying, well, I have dizziness, well, I have lightheadedness, well, my heart races, well, I have numbness, oh, but I also get headaches, oh, joint pain, that's terrible. Instead of going through this whole list of symptoms that affect you every day, we all come up with these different ways to talk about it, and probably some are better than others.
That's funny. I was just at the dentist 2 days ago, and she flips the screen around and was like, "Can you tell me if you have any of these things?" And it was
Oh,
like I'm like, "Oh," I'm like, "Who says yes to all of these?" I'm like, "Everyone gets a
right,
headache every once in a while, so if your symptom is headaches, yeah,
right.
I might think I have
There
POTS if you say that's the only symptom."
For
Yeah.
sure. You talk yourself into all these things that are normal, but if you really write it down and look at all the symptoms, you're like, "Whoa, there is a lot." And until you can look at that hindsight, at least for myself, I didn't put all that together.
And how you explain what POTS is might be different to who you're talking to. So if, like, someone just on the street asked you, what would be your, like, quick elevator, like, "This is what it is."
I usually say it's something for me that is a heart thing because that was my number one symptom.
Right.
I know that's not for everybody, but I say I have high heart rates when I stand. That is much more than the average person. So that's typically my thing. But in the next breath, I'm telling you another podcast, it's not a heart abnormality. It's not an issue on an echo. It's not a structural heart issue. If I have more time, whether I meet somebody on the street or when I talk about it on these POTS calls, I say, when everybody stands, 2 water bottles worth of blood go to our feet. In a normal body, it pumps back up. Nobody thinks twice about it. You have no symptoms. You go about your day. In a POTS body, and if you can see me, I'm doing air quotes, it's the broken part in POTS, right? It's and without going into all these crazy details, it's the part where the blood tends to stay there. It's blood pooling. It stays there. So the rest of your body freaks out. You have high heart rate. You have headaches, dizziness, lightheadedness, blood pooling from your GI system to go and take whatever extra blood isn't being used for digestion, which is also why the gut gets affected and slowed digestion. You have numbness, tingling. If that body is not getting the blood flow as it should, things really get ugly.
I was telling my mother-in-law that I was doing this, like working with you on this podcast and she is a nurse, but she, is retired now and maybe wasn't as familiar with that. She did more home health nursing, but she was, even asking me like, what is POTS? And like, this was early on. And I was like, the best way I can describe it is it's a heart. It's something with the heart, but it manifests in like 1,000 different ways. Like
That's
everyone's so different.
It's probably a better description. Like, it's so true because you know from being on the app and listening to these stories that we're sharing, everybody translates a little bit different. We're all so similar, but they translate very different in terms of what everybody's number one symptom is or what symptoms come at which time. It's all a little bit different. Everybody has, I'm sure, different descriptions of how they share it.
And it's so important to be able to talk about the POTS diagnosis that you have, anyone with those around you to help raise awareness about it. So that way, if maybe you are someone that faints with POTS, you have people in your circle that oh, she's going down. Let's, but this is why, it's
This is
not that,
why, and
yeah.
this is how we can handle it. I have somebody who I've been working with for a while. She was diagnosed at 12. I'm thinking you'll meet her in a later podcast. Her name's Ariel. And she'll tell you her friends know she's in college and she has a group of friends that know, like, okay, if she goes down, this is protocol. And she had to have the conversation like, hey, this is what I have. This is what it means. Don't panic. It's a whole step-by-step process for people with these invisible illnesses.
And it could be challenging to share your story with those people around you. But like you said, it's
Mhm.
just so important to have people in your corner and to advocate for you and to support you along this way that you just have to kind of get comfortable talking about POTS and, however you want to explain it. If you want to use the very long name that I'm not even going to pretend I'm going to say on this podcast. Or if you want to use yeah, it's just a thing I have, and
It's
this
just
is
the
what it
thing I
is.
have,
Yeah.
and I think informing people and sharing more and being willing to be open at the right time, if you have the time, is good, and also being open to the fact that these people just that you're like they're like, "What? What is this?" So you have to give them grace that they might be like, "Well, that's weird,"
Right.
something like that. It is weird. It affects so many different ways. But what I'll tell you is when I tell somebody, other people will say, "Wait, I've heard of that." Or maybe they don't know the name, but I know somebody who's been struggling too. Or maybe they don't know, but they tell another person, and I can't tell you how many people then have been referred back to me or reached out or family friends or, messages on Facebook or Instagram. Sharing is important, especially for this community that it needs to be shared. So don't be afraid to share and really tell what the symptoms are because I would bet that maybe they don't know exactly, but they may know somebody that has symptoms that are similar or somebody else struggling, and you might have just put the final piece for somebody else in the puzzle.
Yeah, and the more you share, hopefully the majority of those reactions that you're getting are positive, that they, you know, are willing to like listen and say, okay, like, I
Mhm.
understand now, or this really helped me better understand what you're going through, or connect with someone else that might be experiencing that. So we really hope that all of your interactions are positive when you are sharing the
Yes.
news.
Yeah, and just be open, and I think, social media is a good place for people to learn and be vulnerable and just share what they're going through. That's what this whole thing's about. Sharing positive information, sharing, relating to others, building a positive community. That's what we're aiming for.
Yeah, and that's something you find if you join the POTS Life program, right? We have an
Yes.
online forum that you get to connect with other folks living with POTS that you can share recipes, share tips, share symptoms. I mean, I shared my lunch the other day in there because I was
Yes.
proud of what it
Someone
made.
shared their breakfast, right?
Yeah.
I I think it translates, at least I hope, and that's been the feedback, but I really think that forum is turning into something very just cool. I think it's cool because you can relate and people are opening up and everybody's at different points, but I think it's pretty awesome that somebody just starting in month 1 can look and say, "Hey, I'm just starting out." And somebody in month 7's like, "Hey, this is where I am." We even have graduates lumped in there. So people can add their little tidbits of like, "Okay, I know how you felt at month 3, but this is what you can
Yeah.
experience." So really giving that place of sense of community inside the app is something I'm pretty proud of.
Yeah, I think it's amazing to see all the conversations happening in there and build that network of support that is just
Mhm.
so important, and you're doing it with folks across the country.
Everywhere.
Yeah. It's
And I think it's cool because when I talk to people or they're in office or, via these phone calls, a lot of times I'll say, "Do you know anybody else with POTS?" And they don't. I didn't know anybody else with POTS. So it's cool because you can go in here and you automatically are joined into a community and you don't have to look for it anywhere else.
yeah, we can still connect with you. We can still support you along your journey and connect
Mhm.
you with folks that know exactly how to say postural blah 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 and move on.
They get it. They know how to say it and they're sharing with others too. And it allows you to get feedback from somebody else besides Britt and I, because obviously we think it's awesome. But
Right.
I think real life perspectives from others that are going through it at the same time, same type of program, I think that's valuable.
Absolutely. We hope today you got a little bit more confidence in how to talk about POTS with your friends and family and just people you meet in a day-to-day setting.
Yeah, and if you want to join that sense of community, we would love to have you join us on the Pots Life app. To do so, you head to our website, thepotslife.com. You click sign up now, and it walks you through the process of how to download the app. And once you log in, you get started. That forum is there right away. And of course, all the other cool features we built in there.
Yeah, we hope that you'll like or subscribe to our podcast
Yes.
and
Share it with others.
yeah, and we do intentionally try to keep our podcast short because I know like Kelsey and I myself, we have a hard time finding time to film the
Uh,
podcast. Listening is a whole nother story. So
right. As we move through, they're short, we hope beneficial episodes, and we'll keep coming up with new topics.
until next time.
We'll see you then.